А сейчас я хотел бы пригласить коллегу из Microsoft. Uroš, you're welcome.
Guys, I'm just taking this one, so okay. So let's see if this is working. Yeah, it is. So how many DevOps engineers we have in this room? Yeah. Anyone finds this funny? These are actually the real life examples of what's going on in the organizations. So there are a lot of, like issues between the devs and the IT people, and we just develop the code and then hand it over to the IT guys, and we say, like it's their problem, it's not working anymore. So that's one thing, but also the other thing is that the organizations are not doing enough testing. So, but you have engineers that say, I don't do testing, but when I do it in the production. So that's pretty cool, right? And the last one is, like you have a lot of organizations that say, like we are doing DevOps already, but there are so many pieces that are missing in this whole process. So basically, on Google or on the web, you can find a lot of jokes about the DevOps. The one that I also like, DevOps is a buzzword. So although it's really effective, it's been used a lot of times, and also in a lot of combinations. So you have DevOps for AI, which we'll talk, DevOps for database. I saw WinOps recently, and so on. So a lot of combinations. But let's start. So my name is Uroš Kastelic. I'm coming from Slovenia. I'm at Microsoft working as a technology solution professional for the Azure application development. And yeah, DevOps is just one of the things that I've been working on recently. There are a lot of great examples, a lot of great websites that you can go to and find some resources. So I believe we will share the slides with you, so you'll have that information over there. Why should you care about DevOps? So there's been a research done by Dora, and they found out that organizations that implement DevOps in their organizations, they just basically increase profitability, be more efficient, be more effective. There are some KPIs that show that organizations that are implementing the DevOps basically have faster or shorten their deployment frequency, so they're doing much more deployments. They are shortening the time needed for changes, so change lead time, for example, and so on. So basically, there is something on DevOps, right? So when we are talking to the customers and explaining about the DevOps, like they're like, seriously, like DevOps can do that, and yeah, basically it can. It's a culture that you implement into your organization that helps you do that. So before this baby starts crying, let's go on. And as mentioned, there are a lot of different variations of what DevOps is, and you find them, a lot of them online. There is basically one that we have within Microsoft, and we say that like DevOps is the union of people, processes, and products that enable continuous delivery of value to the end users. Basically, the value is the thing that really pops out from this statement, and something that you really have to focus on. Through the DevOps process, I know that you're aware of this, but through the DevOps process, there are a lot of phases. And basically, as said in the beginning, so there is really a culture on the people side. They really have to adopt and learn, like how to do these DevOps, how to communicate within the teams, which tools to use, and so on. So that's something that we'll talk about today, and see how Microsoft can help you with that. So basically, there are in this couple of phases through the DevOps, let's say, culture. There are also tools that you can use for each and every one of them, and we're going to focus today on Azure DevOps. And Azure DevOps is what came out of previously known Hope everything's okay. Visual Studio Team Services. So basically, Azure DevOps is the successor of Visual Studio Team Services. And also, now we have Azure DevOps Server, which is something that was previously called Team Foundation Server. Azure DevOps Server 2019 is currently in public preview. You can download it, you can test it out if you want. But it's not just that, right? Because there are a lot of different phases. You also need to monitor what's going on with the applications. So there is an application insights, security center, and also, for example, for different applications, for example, for mobile applications, you also have the Visual Studio App Center. Azure DevOps. So there are a lot of tools or services within the whole product. And depending on what you need, you can just enable for that specific project. So previously you had to use, or there was everything from this stack in your project that you created in Visual Studio Team Services. Now you can just enable what you want. So for example, if you're doing the agile planning, or you're doing like a Scrum, Lean, Kanban, you can just work with the Azure boards. If you need repos for like a Git, for your version control, just use Azure repos. Pipelines is something that we'll focus today. Pipelines is the tool that enables you the CI/CD process through the project, and it can hook up to a lot of different open source tools as well. Test plans for the, let's say, manual and automated testing, and the artifacts for storing of course, the packages, hosting the packages. So you all know that we embrace open source, and also with Azure DevOps, we cannot pass that. I mean, there's so many connectors to open source software that you can use, and it's really important to understand that. So basically what we're saying is that with the Azure DevOps, you can always connect to any platform, any tool for your DevOps process. So even you can do like something like connection with Jenkins, connection to the AVS, Dockers, and so on. And basically, this is the process how it goes. So the standard Microsoft way of working would be like take the DevOps process and take Azure DevOps for the entire development and the build and the testing and the release of your software, and then, for example, Key Vault for storing the credentials, and at the end, application insights, for example, for monitoring. Now, if you're doing the mobile development, you can also include, for example, Visual Studio App Center for deploying, for testing, and so on. But now we changed a lot, basically, where, of course, there is also an open source DevOps project, for example, in some organizations where they're using open source stack, open software stack. And what we can do now is just connect at any point of time to any of these OSS. I think I captured just a fraction of this OSS stuff. Basically, we are adding support on a continuous basis. So, even if you're an individual or a startup or a bigger organization that would like to adopt Azure DevOps, there are some things that you can even start ad hoc now if you want. There are some things that you can start for free. And for example, Azure Pipelines and the public repos is one of the things. So if you want to test it out, I encourage you to go to either this website, or you'll find some other websites down below, and just test it out, see how it goes, see how you can build, test, and deploy your software. Let's skip. And of course, the GitHub. You're aware that we acquired GitHub. GitHub will, as you know, stay as a separate organization within Microsoft, but we are working closely with them to integrate our software with their software. And for example, one of the cases is integration of Azure pipelines into their into the GitHub. So basically, when you do the commit, you can always then automatically hook up the Azure pipelines to do the CI/CD in the Azure pipelines. Anyone wants to see how the Azure DevOps tool looks like? Yeah. Okay, so let's go. Sorry for the cropping, but I hope you see everything. So basically, this is the Azure DevOps service online where you can, let me see if the Okay, so this is actually my project, DevOps KubeNet Core, and what you see here is just some overview of this project. Now, what you can go and you can create a dashboard for yourself. So, for example, you can customize this dashboard, and this dashboard can give you then the information about the work that you have, some work items that are assigned to you, for example, some releases, information about the releases, the team members, deployment status, and so on. So basically, you can create and customize it for yourself. Now, I mentioned agile planning, tracking the work, Kanban, and so on. So boards have this pretty nice Kanban, and one thing that you need to know is in the roadmap, we're going to do some modification to this Kanban. It's going to involve some new pretty nice things as well, be much more advanced. So expect some changes around boards in the, let's say, 3 to 6 months. But here you can, like see the backlog. So basically what we here see is the, let's say, lean methodology with some work items that are actually assigned to people with some tasks, so the user stories and the task. And for example, you can also see the backlog. So it depends on you if you want to use like a Scrum methodology or something else. It's up to you to customize basically the Azure boards to your needs. So what we see here is the backlog information divided into sprints. You see how many, for example, the user stories have been assigned into a specific sprint. You see some on top, for example, some information about the work distributed and so on. Now that's shortly about the Azure boards. What we have is, the next thing is Azure repos. So Azure repos is a version controlling system. You can select if you want to use a Git or you want to use the Team Foundation version control. That's up to you. But what we see is nowadays majority is using like a Git. So basically it stores your source files. You can hook it up to different IDEs, for example, Visual Studio Code, we've seen Eclipse also, and so on and so forth. So basically that's the files. And then we come to the pipelines. And we will focus today on pipelines mostly because it's basically the power, or let's say the brains behind the Azure DevOps. So what you can do is you can integrate the CI and CD pipeline into the Azure DevOps, and you can say, okay, so I'm going to create a pipeline where I'm going to connect to any kind of, for example, the Git repository or TFEC. I'm going to select, for example, which branch, and no. Okay, and then I'm gonna select, for example, a template file, and the template file will describe, for example, what I want to do. For example, I want to build through this CI pipeline. I want to build a Docker image and push it to a container registry, for example. What you can do is also you can say I'm gonna create an empty job and do everything on your own. So basically, there are some templates here for you to make it a little bit easier, but you can also create your own file to do it. As mentioned before, for example, we integrate with Jenkins and other software, and this is, for example, the template for connecting to the Jenkins job, so queuing a Jenkins job right out of the Azure pipelines. So when I'm gonna, for example, commit a code to the master branch, I will enable the continuous integration trigger here, and this is gonna trigger the pipeline where, for example, the code will be then, so when the Azure pipeline will then trigger the Jenkins jobs, it's going to do some job, create an artifact, and then which will be still stored in Jenkins, and then, for example, the Azure pipeline will download the artifact and proceed putting it into this artifact storage here, and then we can use for example, just the CD pipeline within the Azure pipelines for continuing our DevOps process. So basically, this is just one example. And here you see just some of the information that you can configure. There's always a bunch of stuff that you can configure for each task. Now, that's a separate case that we have. For example, we're going to create, we have a source code which you saw previously in the repos, and we're going to take that. And what you're going to do is we're going to build a Docker image. We're going to push that image at the end to the Azure Container Registry, and in the CD pipeline, then we're going to take that image and put it to the Azure Kubernetes Service and deploy it as a website. As you see here, we have some agents, and these agents can be defined, for example, they are hosted agents, or you can even hook your own agents if you have them on premise, so you can always do this hybrid combination. But basically, you can select if you want to do this on Linux or Windows, or use the Visual Studio and so on. As mentioned, this is just predefined, for example, or a custom task, so you can always connect it to any of your tasks that you want that are actually here, or we are pretty open and allow also connection to the marketplace, and you can find on the marketplace some information there, download it or connect it to some third-party tools as well. Now, through this process of the CI/CD, you can always store some variables because the idea of the DevOps is to try to parameterize the information that you have in your applications, make it more and more simple, so that through the entire process of the DevOps, you will have, for example, this configuration that can be changed, for example, when you're deploying it to the dev environment, test environment, production environment. So, for example, what we have here is some variable group where we have some variables, and those variables are stored like a secrets here. But what you can also do is we can link these secrets to an Azure Key Vault. So Azure Key Vault will then securely store our configuration file, not a configuration file, but some secrets, which will be then used throughout the deployment process, for example. And then, like these are the variables group that we have stored in our CI process, and we can always reference to them in our tasks. So what next? Through this CI and later through this CD process, we can always enable triggers where we say, okay, if someone commits a code to the, for example, specific branch, I want to trigger this CI process. So that was shortly about the CI. Now the CD, the first one, when you click the releases here, you see all your releases that were actually that were triggered through the Azure pipelines, and see how the deployment actually went. So that's a simple one. That's an easy one, just with one stage. So this is, for example, the example of that release. With what you'll see next is some logs, but here you just see information about like who started it and what the artifact was produced, and then, for example, how it went into different stages. So if you go into that specific stage, what you can see is how the entire tasks were executed. And if you even click on a specific task, you can get this log information, which you can also download and see what was going on. If, for example, somewhere failed, you see why it failed, and you can correct it. Now, that one was very simple, just one stage, but you can always do some parallel stages. You can always combine it, for example, into different environments. So you can do a simultaneous or parallel deployment. For example, you have some triggers that you can select here. You even have, for example, some approvers, so pre and post deployment approvals. So that's basically one of the best practices that has been used. For example, if you want to publish something to a production, just don't leave it to anyone to do it, but there is some person that has to approve, for example, the last submit to the production environment. So then if you go to the one of the last stages or phases of DevOps is monitoring and learning what's going on with our, for example, applications. And what we see here is we connected the application to an application insights, and it's basically just you just add some chunks of code into your project, and it will then send the information to the application insights, and you will see the information about how responsive was your app, where it failed, how many users were using that app, and so on. So basically, that's the continuous learning experience that is always also something that DevOps process have to consider. So that's a separate let's say, insight that you can get from the application insights. Basically, just information, you know, like operations on your applications, how fast they were, and so on. So that was just, I executed this one yesterday. So that was, you know, just an overview on the Azure DevOps. And there is another set of services called Azure DevOps Project within the Azure portal itself, where you can go and create some projects for you. If you don't want to, for example, go manually through this entire Azure DevOps and, you know, like clicking the repos and pipelines and so on. So what you can do is here is you start from scratch. It's a little bit easier for you to define the DevOps process. In the background, this wizard will actually create everything that we just spoke about, but in a much easier way. So for example, here you'll define, you know, like what your projects is, on which platform is on. For example, I just selected here .NET, but you can always also bring your own code. So basically this will create a project in the DevOps, Azure DevOps, set the repo for you, and also create a CI/CD pipeline for you as well. To deploy into the environment, which you'll see next, is configured through this Azure DevOps project. So basically, in the previous image, we selected, for example, the framework. Here, we're going to select, for example, where we want to deploy it to, so to which service in Azure. And as maybe you've seen below on the previous slide, you know, we are constantly adding some new connections to new services. Then, for example, here in the last phase, you then select your organization, so Azure DevOps organization. So basically, you're hooking it up to your Azure DevOps, selecting the subscription for the Azure portal for all this environment that you're going to deploy, defining some information about for the Kubernetes in this example. And when you do this, you're basically done. This is what you see in Azure portal. So an overview of your DevOps project. That's why I mentioned it's made much simpler for you to use the Azure DevOps. But in the background, what you actually create is this build pipelines, release pipelines, repositories. So basically everything that we saw in the previous example of the Azure DevOps. Okay, so that's Azure DevOps, and it's really something that you should look up to. Sorry, the slide is cropped, so you don't see the entire URL, but basically you will get the information. For the teams or for the organization that are having a lot of developers or need for creating these self-service dev test labs, we have Azure Lab Service, or I think it's still called Dev Test Lab in Azure Portal. And it enables you to create the images which then your users, for example, some developers or, for example, testers will use and provisions themselves their own virtual machine with already pre-provisioned tools on it. So basically you package the image with all the tools that this specific group of people will need, and you just have it online. Whenever there is a need for this particular environment, you would just go here or create a self-service provisioning environment, and then just or not just download, but just execute the provisioning of the virtual machine. When you don't need it, you just close it, and it will be removed. So basically, you're provisioning yourself whenever there is a need, a new environment. So that's one aspect also when we're talking about the DevOps, because what we've seen with the organization is they have a lot of, for example, some organizations, they have a lot of testers that they want to supply with specific environment, and they can do that, for example, to the lab services. Next thing is infrastructure and configuration as a code. So basically, as mentioned previously, it is good that you make or automatize the process, maybe simplify the environments and make them be, let's say, unique or unify them through this process. So basically you have the same set of environments, if it's possible, through the different stages, for example, the dev, the test, the production. Even if you don't have, you can always define your environment through the infrastructure as a code. And basically what we have in Azure is Azure Resource Manager that basically allows you to define the environment by just creating a JSON file. And then this JSON file will be submitted or pushed to the Azure Resource Manager that will basically create the environment for you. But we are also supporting the third-party tools, such as, for example, Terraform or Ansible, Chef, and so on, to connect to do this provisioning and management of the tools. For creating the environments or ARM templates, there is a very nice website on a GitHub that you can go to, and the community is providing a lot of examples. And you can go there, you can see some examples of the ARM templates. You can always open one of them and visualize it in the ARM wizard. Basically, you will see how it looks like, the environment, when it's going to be provisioned in your Azure. But you can always also download this ARM template, see it for yourself in your editor, change, make modifications, and basically use it then in your process. Now, again, in this process of the DevOps, there is also a need for not just getting the insights, what's going on in your application, but also making your environment secure. So basically, we're hooking it up to the Azure Security Center here. We're just connecting the Azure Security Center and the Azure Monitor to your environments and trying to protect it. Basically, there are a lot of tools and services, features in Azure Security Monitoring, including, for example, threat protection, which will then apply to your environment and make it secure, or give you just some recommendations for increasing the secure score of your environment. So basically some recommendations you have here, you can check it out, what's going on, and then when needed, just improve those changes to make it more secure. Smarter Insights, we talked about this already. So basically there is Azure Monitor and the Application Insights as a service in Azure. It gives you an overview of your environment and what's going on. Now there's some customer stories that I want to show you today, but as you are a technical audience, I would refer you to this one, this website where you have public cases. For example, in this case, I selected the DevOps filter here, and I got the customer stories on the DevOps. And basically what you can see for each and every this case, you see, like what technologies customer use. You also see some proposed architecture or some architecture that they've been using in some cases. It's written there as well. But basically the technical story or technicalities behind the customer case, because these are usually just marketing slides with some like words or statement that the customer made, how they are more efficient by just implementing the DevOps, but here you see just exactly what they did. So that's that. I think I have still 20 more minutes. So what we're gonna take a look now is some other things, but such as, for example, mobile DevOps and DevOps for AI and so on, and security. But I need to mention that we're also using the Azure DevOps for our internal people. For our internal environments, for our internal deployment and projects. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to see how and what we are doing, to check it out at this URL. But basically, we are using Azure DevOps to develop Azure DevOps. So that's yeah. So check it out over there at the website. DevSecOps. So as I mentioned, like there's a lot of variations or security in DevOps, or how to make more DevOps more secure and so on. DevSecOps. The idea about DevSecOps is to bring the security guys much earlier in this development process. So basically what we're doing is we're shifting security more to the left, to the development phases, and not like traditional security, which was defined on more like a waterfall principle, where they were involved just after the product was pushed or deployed to the production already, so, or at least at the testing stage. So what we're doing is we are implementing the tools into the development process. So basically when you're doing the build, you're also doing some security checks. The idea why we want to do that is just to make our environments more secure, because, you know, like as there is a saying, if someone wants to get in, probably they'll get in. But in reality, what we've seen is there are some bad practices that the developers have been doing. And for example, there is something like, you know, like storing the passwords in the configuration files as a plain text. And we all know how it looks like when this gets messy, right? Also, when you're doing, for example, the builds, there might be some configuration still stored as a plain text in your project. So we are trying to eliminate that. We're trying to make it more secure, and we can do that by implementing these various tools inside of the CI/CD pipeline. For example, one case would be credential scanning. So you have a project somewhere in the Git repo, wherever, and in the CI process, you would start the credential scanning, which will go through the files you have, and with some regex here, it will try to find some information. What you also have is open source vulnerabilities. There are some proven already open source software that are vulnerable. Tough word. So what we're doing is we're basically making connections to different tools that are checking, and they have a knowledge base about these tools, and is then checking whether are you referencing somewhere in your product, and then just, you know, like informing you to maybe stop using them or just move forward. Whoa, that was fast. Okay. I think the computer knows that I'm lacking out of time. So basically, some tools that we have is the white source. It's not ours, but it's something that we can connect to, and the Sonar Cube. And those tools then create something like a report like this, where you can check for your project, you know, like what's going on and some dependencies, issues, and something like that. Some cases or some best practices that we see here is just, you know, like check for your dependencies or the OSS dependencies throughout the process. I'm just gonna make it a little bit faster. Try to do commits to, let's say, master as much as possible, as fast as possible, so that the changes are checked through these CI/CD pipelines. And use some tools. Some of them are free, some of them are you need to pay for them, and use them in the CI/CD process. So two tools that I'm referencing here is the AZSK, Security DevOps Kit for Azure. That's free, available on our website. And another one that is coming pretty soon is Security Code Analysis Extension, which is currently in private preview. So if you are coming from an organization that would like to check this out, you can always sign up for it, and, you know, like you go through this process. But all these tools rely on these SDL practices, Security Development Lifecycle practices, which you can adopt in your organization. So quick overview about the AZSK. AZSK provides scripts, different tools that you can implement in your environment, in your CI/CD pipeline, and also Azure environment. Basically something like a subscription checks, checks on the code as a credential scanner and so on. Even, for example, the IntelliSense that can be built into the Visual Studio and can check, for example, if you're referencing to some methods that are exposing some information and are not safe. Alerting, and so on and so forth. I have only 10 more minutes, so I have a lot more things to show, so I'm going to skip this slide. Basically, it shows how you can, in the CI/CD pipeline, connect to the security tools. Anyone doing the mobile development? Mobile apps development? Nobody? Okay. Yay, one guy. Cool. So this is for you, just for you, man. You should appreciate that. So basically, Visual Studio App Center is a set of tools that we have for, let's say, DevOps process for the mobile applications. We had a lot of different tools which we combined into one, which is called Visual Studio App Center. And it applies similar DevOps principles as we saw previously in the traditional development, also to the mobile development. Basically, in the background, what we're using is we are using connections to, for example, Xamarin is one of the case, or even, for example, native iOS and Android code to then build, even test and deploy the code to the environment, such as, for example, Apple Store, Google Play, and so on. Why it's relevant? Because even when you're doing the mobile app development, you should implement the DevOps practices, such as, for example, testing, distributing the builds to different groups of users, or, for example, to the real stores. So, as you know, we have in Azure a lot of data centers, but I'm pretty sure that some of you have not heard about this one. We have a data center in Denmark that is actually hosts a lot of real mobile devices. It's a lot of them, I don't know the exact number, but a lot, that are all connected, as you see here, to some to the cloud, basically. And when you do it, and I will show you in the demo, you can actually do the deployment to those test devices and then test it in our data center. So this is a Visual Studio App Center. It's similar to what you've seen in Azure DevOps, but basically you can also hook it up to repos that are the Git or in Azure DevOps. And then when there is a commit, you can take that repo, and through the CI practices, you then just build this in your environment. I love tests here, so I'm going to show you some tests. So basically, you saw that I had some application. I did the build. I then pushed that artifact to the test device. And what you see here is just a couple of tests that were executed on one particular device. And you see some very cool tests. I've been, like really struggling on these tests, and yeah, that's basically a built-in test just to check if the app is launched. And the application is amazing. It's a Hello World application. You should download it online if you want. But no, seriously, that's how it looks like, the test. So basically you have your application built inside of your test devices that are real devices, physical devices. You can see through this test, if I would have more extensive tests, you would see where it failed, and you can get the logs and information about what was going on. But here is where the magic happens. You can create your device sets and say, I want to test this application on, for example, the latest and greatest devices that are out there, and you can select them in the list. Basically, there are really thousands of those devices here, all different variations from Huawei Mate 20, iPhones, Samsung S9, Mate, and so on and so forth. So a lot of them. You can select them, create your wish list or something like a test device set, and then distribute your build over there and see what's going on, where it failed, and so on. And it's really interesting to see because, like when you're testing in the data center, your app really pops up on the device and is then tested by you. So these are some analytics that we have, user counts, you see what's going on behind it. But when you're doing the connections with the Azure App Center or Visual Studio App Center, you're basically just connecting to the Azure DevOps and doing the CI/CD process, as you see here, for example. And here we have the test and deploy in the CI/CD pipeline. Also connection to some other third-party providers and other vendors. The last thing that I have is DevOps for AI. I'm not a data scientist, so you will know more than I do about this story. Basically, it was supposed to be my colleague here as well. So she just taught me a couple of buzzwords, which I will share with you, such as, for example, ML, AI, DS, I don't know, Juniper. So cloud. Basically, what I will refer you to is go to this session. Dmitry will explain more into details about DevOps for the data science, but just as you are all here now, why you should care about the DevOps for AI is because there's been also some struggles with data science and how they're doing how the data scientists are doing their projects in the organizations. Basically, there's some best practices for the software development do not apply over there, and what we're trying to do is also bring these best practices also together with them. We got these best practices from, of course, the software development process, such as, for example, using the repos, using the infrastructure as a code, CI/CD pipeline. Now we're bringing that also for the data scientists as well. There are processes, of course, which I assume you already know, that the data scientists are using, but like those processes are somehow separated with the DevOps, the traditional DevOps, the one that I've been mentioning before. And what we're trying now to do is connect this thing together with the thing that I was mentioning before. And basically, it's about the people, processes, and tools again, but making it together with what is possible in Azure, for example. So the next slide. Okay, so there is this process that you have as a data scientist, experimentation phase, where you're doing all these different steps, and now we're combining that with the development and operation teams. We describe this first part as a team data science process. Anyone heard about team data science process, read about it? Yay, one. Okay. No comments. So team data science process is basically a recommendation lifecycle on how you can structure your data science projects, basically. And I'm going to show you in a demo because I'm running out of time. Basically, there are some technologies that you can use in this DevOps process, such as, for example, what is available in the Azure connection with the third-party tools as well, DevOps, Kanban, and so on, and also something for the testing in the Azure. This is how it looks like. Your developers are already developing some app. They're applying the DevOps practices, but then also you have some data science, and they're going to meet in the middle, which is, for example, here Azure DevOps Service, or of course there is also can be some other tools, but we prefer if you use DevOps services. Then, of course, building and deploying to the Kubernetes, and of course at the end you have an app that is connected to the, for example, the AI machine learning algorithms and is getting some information out of it. Now I have 1 more minute, and that is where I want just to show you the demo for the DevOps for AI. We mentioned the boards in the beginning, so also data scientists can use boards for example, for defining the user stories and the tasks within those user stories, such as, for example, how to make everything happen in this first phase, what's called like examination phase, or yeah, you know it. Sorry for that. But then, in the next phase, you also use the repos for storing, and the best practices that we were referring to was how to store the code in, like, for example, these folder projects, that it will be then better used by also the developers later and the entire team. So basically what you're setting up is some best practices folder structure here in the repos. Then you're creating the build, so CI with the pipeline project. And you see here, for example, that we are referring to the Azure CLIs for doing some script checks and trainings of the model. Then we have some releases, and in these releases you see that we are deploying our model to the different stages, and we are also seeing here what went well, what didn't go well, and then, for example, these are the releases in the Azure pipelines, where we have different stages with different tasks. So back to the Azure DevOps. If anyone is using TFS currently, there is also ability to upgrade good for you. Everybody else is already on Azure DevOps, so you should consider applying this. So basically, you can do the migration to the Azure DevOps, or you can even upgrade it to the Azure DevOps Server 2019. There are some free things that you can do if you just want to try it out, or for example, with Visual Studio Enterprise licenses, you get basically everything that we discussed just today. And with that, I thank you for listening, and that's everything from my side. Thanks. I think we have time for 3 more questions or something like that. Yeah, I see over there.
Thank you. Could you tell us, please, if you had with any of your customers any source of comparison of doing business without cloud and doing it on the cloud cost-wise? The full life cycle, please.
Cost-wise. So the easiest way to compare it was for example, so basically, if you just take a look at the beginning, so the full life cycle, as you mentioned, so plan, track, build, deploy, blah, blah, so on. So planning and tracking, you can always, for each of these phases, you can always go with on-prem or the cloud version, right? So it's no big deal here. Now, the planning is something that you define on your own by doing different methodologies and where you're going to plan and track the work. That's simple. So here we don't see any differences, whether you're using, for example, project for storing the work items there, or, for example, user stories, and then just, somehow hooking it up with Azure boards so that your developers can then apply the changes that they did to a specific work item, and then, by doing that, they push this work item to the complete stage, to the done stage, and so on. So basically, with that, we just saw that if they're using, for example, the TFS or Azure boards, we're just making it simple for the developers to define these stages and to move the work items along as they commit the code. But basically, here we haven't seen, any cost comparison, except, for example, for the services that they're using currently on premise, where they have to do like a hardware maintenance for example, project server and so on. Then we go to the repos. Here we see different things. So basically, we see organizations using GitHub, organization using on-prem Git, Team Foundation servers. So again, it varies here as well from, for example, what the customer is already using. But as we are open, we can always connect to different sources, Git or whatever. And here also, apart from some, for example, let's say cost comparison, I cannot go into to details, but basically it comes down to the CI/CD pipeline process. Here we have again the cost that comes down to the hardware, for example, where they are deploying the build agents and the software on premise. Or, for example, if they're using some third-party services, like those things also cost. So unless there are some open source. So what you see here is that for a specific tool that they are using, we can then do some comparison on that. The process itself, what we see is that with Azure DevOps is just, much simply, it simplifies basically the DevOps process, because if you're already using, for example, DevOps or TFS or something like that for other things, then you have just one more thing in Azure DevOps that you can connect, the CI/CD pipeline, for example. And it's so much simpler for connecting to other providers than, for example, I don't know, using 3 different tools. So basically, it's like the tool variation that you have in-house, for example, and learning also your developers to embrace all these different tools, whereas on the other hand, you have only one tool where everything is done. So there are a lot of different aspects, just to cut it down. there are a lot of different aspects that you have to take into consideration, from the hardware cost to the culture cost to the, for example, also basically this kind of stuff. And when you decide, then you have to take everything into the consideration and just do it. Did I answer your question briefly? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about the benefits, and definitely the benefits is one of the things that's driving the whole thing, right? Yeah. The cost would be on kind of changing the culture, as you said, right? Mm-hmm. And probably bringing on board the more educated and careful trained DevOps as well. Although it depends what you compare with. If you already have DevOps, it may be less of a step cost. Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
I think a great topic to discuss in our Q&A zone.
Yeah, if we can discuss it on a Q&A later. Some more questions?
Yes. Maybe on Q&A zone.
Okay, so with that, thank you so much, and let's continue. Thanks.